Alright, so here we are. This will be the last part of this game. And in this part we're going to do just two things. We're going to add a new power-up so that the player can get more life. And then we're also going to add a background that looks like we're scrolling through space. So that'll be fun to do. So we're going to start with the power-up though, and for the power-up it's going to take the most work, so we're going to go ahead and get it out of the way. So I'm going to add a new sprite, and we're going to create, call it SPR power-up, and this is going to be obviously for our power-up. So we're going to edit this image, and I'm going to click on image, and we're going to import a strip image, and we're going to go to our assets for this game, and we're going to get the sprite sheet just like we had before, and we make sure that our number of frames per row is 1. If it's not 1 right now, my suggestion is to change frames per row first and then number of frames, because the number of frames, if you try to set a number of frames less than the number of frames per row, it's going to actually change it back to the number of frames per row when you exit out of that box. So you'll have to go back and fix it anyway. So change the frames per row first, then the number of frames. So, but we are going to zoom in here, and we're going to choose this purple kind of pill type thing here. So I'm going to click here to move the selector right there. And then we're going to change the frame width and height. So the width is going to be, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And the height, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now when I change it to that, you'll kind of notice, you should notice that the little selector changes size so that it just is selecting the pill itself. You should see a horizontal pixel offset of 28 and a vertical pixel offset of 36. Once you got those, we click convert, click yes, and we have the pill into our editor. Now we're going to go ahead and I'm going to remove the corners. Use the color remove tool because it was less clicks, I guess, than the eraser. But it works just the same. You could just erase the 4 corners. That would work too. Exit out of there. We're going to change the origin to middle center, just like pretty much everything else. And we're done with the sprite. Now we can create the object. OBJ power-up. And so the power-up is going to give some life to our player when we receive it. So first of all, we need to make sure the player can get it. To make sure the player can get it, we need to make sure that it's moving downward. So we're going to add an event called, well, add the create event. So one thing that we can do is we can make the power-up move down when an enemy gets it. So if we go to our vertical speed, we'll set the vertical speed, or we're going to set speed, and then we're going to specifically set the vertical speed. So I'm going to add a set speed. We're going to go ahead and set the vertical speed to 3, so that it starts moving down when we get it, or when it gets created. Then we're going to go ahead and add the collision event for the player. And since we're already here, we might as well do this. What we're going to do is we're going to do 2 things. One, we need to destroy this instance because we don't want to continue giving the player life after they've caught it. When they catch it, it should go away. And then we should go ahead and give the player some life. So click an assign variable. The problem is the variable that holds The amount of life for the player is part of the player object. It's not a global variable. So I'm going to click the little down arrow to apply this to the other instance, just to make sure I'm hitting the player and not something else. And so I'm going to change the hits variable by 10 and click relative. When I do that, if I add 10 hits to the player, if the player's hit value is already over 10, that means it puts them over the 20 that we originally assigned. And 20 is going to be our limit. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that the player never goes over 20. And really what that means, that's what we would say in the game, but for the player what that really means is that if we go over 20, let's reset it back to 20. So in our player object, we're going to go to the step event. Give myself some more space here. In the step event, we're going to add an if variable above the one that's there. It's also for hits though, but now it's if hits is greater than 20. And if hits is greater than 20, we're just going to reset it back to 20. So add an assigned variable for hits and change it back to 20. Okay. So to the player, outwardly it says you can't get more than 20 hits. Never goes over 20. The reality is that the way we do that is we check and see if we're ever over 20, and if we're over 20, just reset it back to 20. So it gives the player the impression they're never going over 20. So that's two parts of the equation here. The last one is that we need somehow to drop it. And so we're going to have the enemy, just enemy 1 though, drop it. So we're going to scroll down to the bottom here because this is where, this if variable is where the enemy is destroyed, and that's how we're going to determine, or that's how we're going to possibly create a power-up. And just like we did for Brick Breaker, we're going to use some randomization to do that. So we're going to scroll all the way down here to random, and we're going to get, let's see, where's it at? Random, there we are. We're going to first add a randomize, because there's no randomize here yet. Then we're going to add a get random number. And I'm going to change this to integer. We're going to leave the 0 there, and we're going to go up to 7. So we're going to really have a 1 in 8 chance of getting a power-up. Our target variable will be called power-up, and we'll call it a temp, because we're just using it long enough to determine whether to drop a power-up or not. And so we need to check and see what the value of the minimum, or what the value of the power-up variable is. So let's scroll all the way back up, get an if variable, check the power-up variable, and check if it's equal to 0. Just an easy one to do because that's the defaults for the if variable block. And if it is 0, let's create an instance of the power-up object, and we're going to create it at the same location as the enemy is destroyed. So I'm going to click relative for both the boxes and leave those both as 0. So now, what I should notice is I should see the player when I destroy. So I should see a couple of things. When I destroy an enemy, every once in a while, I should have a power-up coming. There it is. I missed it that time. But we want to see, one, is the power-up giving us, is the power-up actually giving us, oh, I just died. That's okay. Is the power-up giving us, life? And it's hard to tell when we have our full life, so let's maybe go ahead and intentionally lose some life. There we go. And try to let's get a power-up here. Come on. Give us a power-up. Jeez. So, sometimes it'll take you a little bit to figure it out, to get the conditions in order to test. There we go. And there we go, we got some life. Now the other thing that I'd like to test is to make sure that that There we go. So we got it while we were really low on life, but now when I get hit, I still lose. It looks like I'm losing life. So we're not going over 20 life, as it were. So that's really it for the power-up. The only other thing we're going to do is we're going to add the background for the game. So we're first going to add a sprite, create sprite. This is going to be called SPR background. And this one we're just going to straight up import. I'm going to click import, and I'm going to click and add space.png. And click yes. And this one I'm going to go ahead and leave the origin in the top left. I don't really need to do anything else with this. I've just created this image that we're going to use to set the background. But we're going to set it up so that the background looks like it's scrolling. So it looks like we're moving through space. So to do that, we're going to go to the room, and what I need to do over here in the layers pane, I need to click background. These are layers of your room. Okay, and we really haven't talked about this before, but know that there are layers. One layer is called instances, and in every room, these are the first two layers. These are the layers that are created. The instances layer and the background layer. And what it is it allows you to then do different things. All instances are created in the instance layer. You cannot create an instance in the background layer. It's that simple. You'll notice the different icons here to represent the different layers. The two circles are instance layers. The two kind of look like a little mountain picture is a background. And you can hide or show these layers, and it'll hide or show whatever is part of that. We have them both on right now because we don't need to hide anything. For this, we're going to add, once we click on the background, we're going to go down here to the background layer properties. We're going to click on where it says no sprite, and we're going to add the sprite background. If we don't do anything else, we would have at least a space background that would work, and our game would be sufficiently spacey. But we want to make this look like we're moving through space, that the character is moving through space, and then these enemies are arriving and dealing with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn the vertical speed on, and we're going to set the vertical speed to 0.5. This is slower than all of the different things in our game. Everything is slower than 0.5. And the other thing that we're going to have to do is make sure we select vertical tile. And the reason for that is that if we just put vertical speed on, it's going to behave like a sprite. It's just going to move down, and once it moves down, once it gets to a certain, once it moves down once it's off screen, it's gone. So essentially, we're going to create a bunch of tiles that simultaneously scroll and create this look that we're kind of it'll essentially be recycling this, but it'll create this look like we're flowing through space, and we're going to see that in a moment. And then we might make an adjustment to our power-up because that might make sense for this, and I'll explain that in a moment. But now here you can see, looks like we're moving through space, and then here comes our guys, and then we have the power-ups showing up. We have the enemies showing up. Everything else is the same. The only thing that's really different is the background, and then you'll notice it scrolls as we go. Okay, so now. The thing with the power-up. If you notice in games, a lot of games will have the power-up, you obviously got to get the power-up to the player. And we haven't created a way for the player to move forward. So, because they're not moving forward, we can't simply let it sit there and let the player go get it. We still have to make it come towards the player. But because now we're moving the background, and there's this illusion of movement, we can set up our power-up to move at the same speed as the background. And if we do that, it gives the illusion that that power-up is sitting there, and we're just, since we're flying along, we'll be able to get it. And it'll probably make it a little bit easier for us to get the power-up, so we may also want to change how often the power-ups come up. But if we change this to 0.5, which is the same value as our background, and then we're going to play and see what that looks like and kind of get an idea. And what it should look like is it should look like essentially the power-up is sitting there waiting for us to come, waiting for it to come to us. And you can see that's what it looks like. And then I can see I can time it and get it, right? And we can always up the speed of our background. The problem is if we up the speed of the background to 1, for instance, the 1 is going to match the speed of the enemy 2, and so therefore it's going to look like the enemy 2s aren't traveling. Like they're just like showing up. So that's it. That's all we've done for this game. Of course, you're going to get to add on to it on your own. And we'll go over those expectations and what I'm looking for. But this is pretty much it as far as the game goes. You're welcome to add on wherever you want to add on that fits within the project.